Hello and welcome to another episode of the Game Dev London podcast. My name is Stuart De Ville. I'm co-founder of Game Dev London. You by now will be quite familiar with my voice if you've been following the podcast. And with me today is Niall Crabtree. I'll briefly let him introduce himself.
Oh, only briefly. Okay, I'll keep it short. So I'm Niall. I'm a game designer. Currently working in industry, working on a top secret VR project, but working primarily as like a level designer. But also, which is important to this topic in particular, is that I'm currently a part-time lecturer teaching game design at the University of Huddersfield.
Nice. Yeah, so today our topic is game dev education. Is basically what we're going to be talking about in a nutshell. Um, as has been alluded to, Niall's been doing some lecturing. I was up until very recently a game design lecturer myself, and we have both decided that there's quite a lot that people don't know about game development education. Probably it might even be good for students who are like just, trying to pick a course or whatever to kind of understand what they'll be getting into. And if you're looking to get into teaching on the teaching side of things, we can maybe highlight a few things there too.
Yeah, that's an
Um,
interesting thing that you touched upon there because I think it'll be good to explore what it means for people who are looking to go into game dev or like looking to do a degree in game dev. Because from
mm,
what I found anyway, because I'm actually currently teaching the same course which I just finished, like I just got the
yeah,
degree in it, and on both sides of things, there are definitely people who go into it because they like to play games and not
yeah.
necessarily because they like to make games, and that's a big like sort of like a rude awakening for them with that. So that would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so I was working in a college, so helping students get into university, and a lot of it is with college. I find that students are trying to actually even figure out what the hell it is they want to do, and I think colleges can be a good place to do that. But we had the same, and I think some of it comes from the parents. Like parents are like, "Oh, you play computer games. You don't seem to be interested in anything else. Go do that." Um, but they actually parents have, and depending on the parent, I would imagine, but parents generally, it would seem, have no idea what is involved in a game development course. Um, Fortunately, the colleges would we were doing quite a lot of stuff like meet the tutor events before students signed up. So parent parents that were interested in finding out more were able to talk to me directly, and I was able to explain to them that with the particular course I was teaching, I tried to make sure that there was a really broad overall covering of game development. So we went everything from design conceptual stuff into some actual nitty gritty of building models and all of that side of things. And I even went as far as um, games journalism, so that literally by the time the student left us, if there was anything that they were interested in games, or if there was anything that they were personally interested in, they could probably plug it into a game development career because there is so much that you can do in game development, both in the actual nitty gritty of making the game and in like the marketing of the game, or if you just want to write reviews about games and stuff. It's quite a broad. I mean, that's why it's the biggest. It's the biggest, not the biggest, but in terms of money each year, uh, the games sector now makes more money than the film and music combined.
No, yeah, it is interesting. Like all the different avenues you can go down. Um, a slight not tangent, but like kind of I can't even think the right word. Like story, essentially. So
Mhm.
I've been friends with this guy. He's called Dave. For about maybe I've known of him at least for like 6 or 7 years. And he's a few
Yeah,
years older than me. And I had no idea that we pretty much lived the same life up until like a certain point where we branched off. So we both
yeah,
went to the same college. We both went to the same university to do game design. And then he ended up like branching off and getting a job in market. Yeah, it was marketing or PR, roughly like a similar field for Team 17. So, and the funny thing is, as well, like he ended up referring me for Team 17 as well. So it might end up like converging again at some point. But yeah, and another thing as well, which you said, which was so true for my parents, and I think for a lot of people as well, is like especially when it's a digital a digital medium which doesn't have like real people in it, immediately all tangibility is lost for how that thing is made. Like when
Mm,
I first got started by making board games before I've moved into video games.
yeah.
And literally, I mean, that is a more tangible product. But even with that, like I said to my parents, "Oh, I want to make board games," and then they were like, "I didn't realize people made those. I just thought they appeared on the and that's the same with games as well. They thought they just like happened, and then that obviously goes into. I mean, it's not even with parents; it's with like just the general. Even like people like in the 20s and 30s. I mean, we saw the GTA 6 leaks a couple of weeks ago,
Mm,
and the reactions to like 3 years outdated screenshots, and like even if they were up to date screenshots, people would say, "Oh, it looks awful. Like I can't believe they're working on this game. They should just not do it." When they just shows how little people know about game dev.
yeah. I mean, and we we as game developers experience this all the time with um, our audience, like the vitriol that we can get from an audience because a game is delayed, and they're like, just release it already. What, like, and that, which, and from their perspective, they just see games pop up all the time, so they literally have no idea of just uh how privileged they are in their position to just get to receive all of the stuff that we make. And it seemingly is, well, it's either good or it's bad, but for the most part, we try and make sure they're receiving good stuff, and they do receive it. Um, yeah, and we get a lot of backlash from people that just don't understand
Yeah, yeah,
how it's done and how much work goes into it. And I think even like there's been a lot of news over the past like few years about crunch and how hard the industry is on game developers, and still the audience just don't. Either they are still ignorant and that information doesn't get through to them or whatever, or they literally are just really mean people.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. They think crunch is bad, but also they don't want their stuff to get delayed. That's like kind of
Yeah,
like the two things, and they want both. But yeah. Um, but yeah, anyway, so what I also want to talk about, because it's something, because I've recently just gotten into teaching. I had a
yeah.
very like sort of like passionate reason behind it. What was your sort of reason for getting into teaching game development when you started off?
So I've got kind of like a history of teaching. I many years ago now, I was deputy manager of a preschool. So I used to look after really small minds, and honestly, that's kind of like the best brains you can work with are the tiny ones. Um, and when this opportunity came up for me to apply for the job at the college, um, originally I was kind of like, I know that I can teach people. Like I had done small workshops and stuff in terms of game development, but I'd never like taught an entire curriculum. And when I went for the interview for that job, I was kind of thinking, I don't know if they're actually going to give this to me. My experience is with like 2 to 4 year olds, and these are very different people, very different age ranges. But it actually turned out that a lot of the stuff that I learned um, through uh, through my job at the nursery um, was really relevant because that you know children of any age have the same social emotional development problems. They're still struggling with making friendships and dealing with their emotions and all of this stuff. So they were completely happy with the fact that I would be able to teach everything that I know because I've been doing game dev long enough that they were like, you've got a strong background there. And it was just the added bonus that I had this experience. I was doing my like level 3 in childcare, so I had all of this other experience in the health and safety aspect. So it's kind of a little bit of like I wanted to do it because I love game development and everything that I do. Like even with Game Dev London, I'm doing because to share my knowledge and love and passion of game development.
Mm-hmm.
So this just seemed like the best way of me getting into that. And yeah, it just so happened that they thought I was good for that too.
Yeah.
What about yourself?
For me, it was much. It was kind of like a very personal thing for me because, like I said before, I'd literally just finished a degree. There was actually probably less time between me picking up my degree to be teaching than the students finishing college and then coming to uni. Like it was very, very quick. What
Yeah.
happened was essentially a teacher sort of just left at the last minute, kind of thing. And then one of the teachers who knew me knew that I knew game design well enough, and I was very comfortable with like presenting and like like being up in front of people. Just like offered me the job. So it wasn't really necessarily something which I sought out, but going into it, I definitely had things which I wanted to do and like sort of like motivations behind it. So one of the reasons was and I don't know whether this was sort of a bubble of my like year group or the course in particular, the way it was taught, but even going up to final year, which for some people was 4 years on this course, people didn't know what a game designer was on the game
Mm.
design course because the game it was called game design, but it had game design, game art, and also game prototyping using Unreal blueprints. Um,
Yeah.
and literally up until final year, people thought a game designer and a game artist was the same thing. So one of the things which I wanted, and it wasn't just like a surface level issue of like, no, I'm a game designer, like understand what I do. It was more of like people lacked any sort of appreciation for game design as as like a part of game development. They just
Mm.
assumed that if they made something look nice and the programmers made it functional, then it would just be a good game.
Yeah.
So that was something which I wanted to go in and sort of instill to. I'm teaching first year, so I wanted to sort of instill to them like straight away, like game design is a separate thing. It needs to work. Even if you're not going to be a game designer, you're going to be a game artist because people branch out in a bunch of different avenues as the course goes on. You need to still understand and appreciate game design because then your work will improve because of it. Like if your art is based off the like design pillars or like player personas or anything like that related to game design, then it'll end up being better artwork. It'll work with the game better. And the second thing as well is at the moment, anyway, from what I've seen, it's impossible to break into the industry. I got incredibly lucky with getting my first job in video game development because it so happened to be like I sort of like not picked a mentor, but like I sought after this particular person who was on the course a few years ago, and I wanted them to mentor me. And it so happens that he ran his own game development studio called Sigtrap. After a few months of talking, like I was working on a team project at the time, which was like a first-person shooter game. And part of the mentoring was I would show him the work, I would get into playtest, I would talk about the level design decisions which I made. Then he eventually offered me the job as a level designer. But
Mm.
not very many people have the privilege or like get lucky enough down that route to be able to get a job. And like
Yeah.
you see on LinkedIn all the time, junior game developer, like literally junior game designer, literally the bottom rung to get into unless you count QA as well. But I feel like those are more like sort of like on the same line. But
Yeah.
the bottom way to get into industry, and you need a minimum of like 1 year experience plus one release title, so it's impossible. So what I wanted to do is make it so that students straight away were had changed their mindset to be more focused on just outputting as much as possible because a lot of students, especially from what I've seen, generalizing artists, like tend to sort of hide their work and don't show it because they're worried about criticism. They feel like their work's never finished, so they never show it anywhere. I had a bunch of students in final year who did amazing work but didn't put it on their portfolio, so they weren't getting any callbacks for interviews or anything like that. As soon as they did, then they would do.
Yeah.
So I wanted to try and sort of, even from first year, prepare them from industry as much as possible. Because something which helped for me definitely in first year was um, releasing board games. Like first year and second year, I released 3 board games, and having that on my CV helped so much to get interviews, even though it's still incredibly competitive. That side of thing helps. So that's probably like my main sort of 2 motivators that led me to like be really excited about the role, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, there's two very good points brought up there. But one is that even now, game design and game development are used interchangeably. At my college, when I started, it was called a game design course. And over the time of my being there, I kind of I fell into the trap, if I'm honest. Like I was saying it's a game design course, when really it was a game development course, and it was more of a foundation course with the broadness of which we were teaching. So the confusion starts really early on.
Hmm.
when students or anyone is looking to get into the industry, because game development is considered game design. Making whatever aspect of making a game is considered part of design, whereas actually designing a game is, like you say, it's an entire skill set of its own. And the other thing that you brought there, which is that teaching even now is still trying to catch up with industry, still trying to catch up with terminology, what sort of defined roles are. When I joined the college, I was doing a lot of educating of my peers, like of the people that I worked with about what the roles were, what my jobs were, and yeah, the other thing is that the games industry is moving so fast anyway that it's hard for us within the industry to keep track, and we need to get better at conveying how everything works and what everything means. And again, this is part of the reason why I created the Game Development podcast, because we want to get more of this information out there. We need more people to understand what it is that we're doing to try and eliminate as much of this confusion as possible, so that it is easier for indies or for anyone to get into the industry. And and even what you mentioned there about your path in getting into the industry, um, which is quite a unique path, but it is kind of one of the best ways to get into the industry, because it is insanely hard um, when you're looking like for jobs on LinkedIn. And a lot of the problems that come with those job postings is both um, that recruit a lot of them are posted by recruitment agents, and those agents don't understand what it is that they're trying to
No,
recruit
I've
for,
dealt with my
really.
fair share of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes an indie studio, like the people within the studio might have experience making games, but they don't have experience on the business side of things. They don't have experience how to create a role, how to give someone enough of a job that's worthy of the pay structure that they're putting in, and not asking for things that are ridiculous. And a lot of people who kind of start their own studio tend to be the people that have a broader skill set. They're more generalist. So everything to them seems easier. Like, for example, I have a lot of skill sets when it comes to game development, especially on the visual creation side. Um, and so all of those jobs for me, it's quite easy for me to load my plate with, let's say, doing concept art, taking that into final designs through to 3D models, rigging, animating. That's like four people's separate jobs. That's not, and yet you still see job posts that are including this entire slog, and they're getting paid for like one role. Um, which is fine if it's all like small parts of this, but it tends not to be. It tends to be like a full person's job with a full person's job, like along the full pipeline.
Yeah, like
Um,
four jobs, but only one pays worth of one job's worth of pay. Yeah.
yeah, and some of these people have also had the privilege of being educated in game development. So, they maybe game development has been like their sole passion or whatever. So they've done it at school, but or college or uni, and while they've been doing that, they've been trying to build their own studio. So they have both the experience and the skills, and the qualifications. And so when they create these job posts, they just assume that they're going to try to find people like them, not realizing that there's not very many people that have that broader an experience. It's actually really hard. Um, and I think the final thing on that I'll say is that um, there is a point of privilege in that there are people who have gone to college and university and who have had their first year probably in like a AAA studio. AAA studios have quite high turnover sometimes, especially when they're doing project by project basis. And you get a sea of like 100, especially on the major layoffs that happened not that long ago, where they had 300 people who were let go after a project. And then new students are up against people who um, were new students, but now have like a year of experience. And so um, people are trying to employ or posting jobs specifically for those people, which stops this entry level for everyone who's just trying to make it get in. And
Yeah.
that is why we're seeing this explosion in the indie development scene. That's why everyone is trying to start their own studio and do it for themselves because it's just such a wave to get into anywhere, like especially AAA.
Yeah, definitely. That's the thing as well. I mean, this is dangerously branching off into like a different thing about the like how game development studios hire people. But I will say one thing is like yeah, the other thing as well is like because I speak to a couple of people, like for example, other lecturers that I work with have this sort of like network of like higher ups in different companies that they reach out to for when they like because they do actively try and get students jobs, which is very good as well. I think
Mm.
Huddersfield, out of all the unis who run a game development course similar to theirs, has the highest employment rate, which is shockingly low of like less than 10%. But still, yeah, one of the problems which I told one of the lecturers this like issue of like not being able to find work, and he was like, "Well, that doesn't make any sense because people are crying out for these people to come in." But what he was failing to realize is that they were calling out for these senior and lead positions. And the reason why there is such a drought in those positions is because there is no training up process. Because students are not students, studios are scared to train these people up. Well, that's what we ended up talking about anyway. This is a hypothesis, not like actually saying for factual.
Yeah.
But it feels like students are not students. Oh my god, studios are scared to train these students up to then them go to a different company. And then they've done all the hard work and then they've lost that senior or lead position which they were training this person up for, and they have to try and find another person for it. So I guess that's another reason
Yeah.
why, yeah, it's difficult because like yeah. Anyway, um,
I think again though, a lot of that is people starting studios and not understanding um how you do that and keep these people because this has been a problem historically for other industries where they needed to train people up to get them up the ladder, and it's always better to promote within
mm,
than to bring someone in who doesn't understand your company, doesn't know the culture and all of this stuff that you start to learn from day one, and really you're only fully integrated after your first year. So it's always better to do that. But yeah, there's always this fear that you train someone up and then they leave. So you have to give them really good reasons not to leave. Um, and it's something that other industries do quite well, but the games industry is kind of seemingly yet to catch up on that.
yeah. I mean, there is that there's always going to be that battle with that. Like, I assume people like in charge of money at companies would argue that regardless of how well you treat someone, there is that strategy of other companies of just offering more money, which is almost all the time why people leave studios to go to different studios. It's like, oh, this studio is offering me like 10K extra a year, I'll go there instead. And then that's kind of it then. But yeah, I mean, it would just be better for the industry as a whole as well, for people to be trained within more or like promoted within more. Because like you said,
Yeah,
it does take like a year to get integrated. Like I found that with my job, which I'm at the moment, like I think about 9 months in now, and I'm starting to settle. So yeah, I can imagine that.
yeah, it takes a really long
Yeah.
time. Like all those little small talks that you have over, because you don't just get to know someone. I mean, in some very rare cases, you might be lucky, and like the person you sit next to, you become best buds within the first week, whatever. But like I say, yeah, that's rare. You creating and building relationships when you're in a working environment takes a really long time because you're spending more time working, and you
Mm.
have these tiny interactions in which you make relationships. But
That's
yeah,
actually a good way to segue back onto more of like the education stuff, because
hmm
talking more about how the how you deal with like students, because even like you said with college, it's the exact same with university as well, which is something which I was a tiny bit shocked by. But then again, it was just because like I hadn't been a first year for about 5 years and I got uncomfortable with the uni setting. But like, yeah, it's crazy to see how like what's the word how there's like a lot of social friction that I find between like different students, and obviously as well, not to generalize, but you do come across a lot of more like neurodivergent students as well in this particular sort of field. So I was just wondering like how have you ever like come across any like particularly, not to go into specifics, but any particular like
yeah,
um not what's the word, like tough like cases to crack kind of thing when it comes to students like yeah.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like there are, like I said, there are some students who think differently to each other. In my classroom, in one of my classes, I had to keep two very different types of students separate from each other physically within the classroom, because they just it didn't matter how many conversations I would have with them to explain to them, look, you just think differently. You're clashing because you think differently,
Hmm.
and you can try and have that discussion as many different ways as you want. You're not going to change the way that they think.
Yeah.
So yeah, it did get to a point where I just separated them physically, and we it was fine like for the rest of the year pretty much. There's always I think typically though in a game development class, you the students that are the ones that are going to be more trouble for you are the ones that didn't particularly decide this is what they wanted to do. It's
Yeah.
going to be the ones where their parents said, go to college or get a job, which is something my mum did to me, and I did both. But
Hmm.
but like yeah, so you're going to have students that just were like, oh, I don't want to start working, and then and then mum's like, well, or parent or guardian is going to say to them, well, you can't just live here rent free. You're either contributing or you need to, yeah, go to college because that's paid for, and then they're out with their hair and they can work, and all of these things, all of these problems that happen in a student's background. So, and I did find that those were the students. I even had one student leave within the first 2 months
Hmm.
because when I had a full-on discussion with him about why he was being so difficult, like he just wasn't engaging at all in the content, or was completely disinterested. It was a really hard struggle to get him to do any work. And finally, I sat down with him and we just had this really long talk. And I was like, well, what is it that you want to do? And he's like, I'm looking at doing a what's it called? An apprenticeship in cookery.
Hmm.
Like he wanted to go and do cooking. And I was like,
That's very
wow,
different.
yeah, then there's literally no point me trying to keep you here. If that's what you want to do, that's what you've been looking into. He was like, yeah, I've got like a trial shift next week, and after that, I'm probably going to be out. And so I was like, well, yeah, like if that's what you want to do, good, go do that.
Yeah.
And then yeah, on the other end of it, you've got students who have come in and um, they maybe have done like a Coder Dojo weekend at school, and they picked up some programming skills, and they've been making games like for a year or two before they come to me, and then like I can say to them, okay, we're going to design this, and they're like, I'm like, fully zoned in. And in some cases, they can be your best students. They can also be they've got their own ideas because they kind of feel like they already know this stuff. Um, so they do have their own problems too. But yeah, there's a completely
Mm.
different range of students that you have to deal with.
Yeah, well, you described that quite correctly. I think it's more it's like a spectrum. Like there's like
Yeah,
kind of like the middle where like that's where you get like I feel like most of your students, or at least a good chunk,
yeah,
where they're like they're just like fine, like they get on with it kind of things, and you have like each end where like super focused and like super disinterested. Um, I kind of I have a similar sort of like group with me at the moment. However, one thing which because at the moment we're in class is presentation week or like presentation 2 weeks because the way the module works is you're making a board game and then you have to pitch it as if you're pitching it to like a publisher kind of thing.
yeah,
And another sort of thing, which I should have foreseen, to be fair, was definitely people with like kind of like severe anxiety, which I think is a thing. It kind of it does lead from like kind of is like you touched on with the like parents kind of saying, "Oh, you need to go to uni or get a job." I do feel like it's just a societal thing as a whole as well. There's been a huge shift like in the past like decade or so, from my understand, where it's not like a shock that people go to uni. It's kind of like an expectation now that people will go to uni, like kind of regardless of anything else. And so people
mhm,
just end up picking things to do. Um, and I think that a lot of students who end up having anxiety will pick game design because obviously game design is something which helps them sort of retreat from the rest of the world and just sort of has their own like bubble. But
yeah,
in game dev anyway, one of the if not the greatest tool you can have, is being good at communicating. Like that is like essential. And so that's why we do these pitches, is to get people comfortable with communicating. It's not marked in the first year, but second and third year it is marked. So it's like kind of like gearing them up to like, okay, now you're actually going to start getting like critiqued, and actually like marked on your ability to communicate. And immediately, like within like the first week, emails left and right, Discord messages left and right saying, "No, I can't do it. Can we do a video presentation? Can we do this and that?" And by case, I kind of have the freedom as a teacher to sort of like, especially as it's first year, be like pick and choose which students I feel like would either benefit from maybe a private pitch instead. So like I'd book out a room in the building and like say I can do it to me. Maybe you can bring a couple of friends to watch you, and students which like I can guarantee that if I make them do it in person, in any respect, they will not turn up. So they will do like a video
Yeah.
presentation instead. And again, there's a lot of the reason for the video presentation is you might think that, or one opinion which someone might have is that like you need to like kind of have that tough love sort of thing because they are going to be like forced to do it later down the line. But in my head as well, there's a lot of contributing factors to anxiety. One of those is being new to uni. So I feel like once they get settled in, then when it comes to second year where they have to do it, they might be more able to do it in front of people.
Yeah, I also think that like to a certain extent, public speaking is like a skill set that can be taught and learned and stuff. And but there are some people who like that's more naturally their thing. And so actually by doing like a because this is how I did I did a similar thing for my students where they had to pitch a game idea. And I had them all do a video presentation with slides. So the whole thing was recorded. And that, yeah, I think that tends to allow those who aren't in the same position of being able to talk freely, and those who are better at it, it kind of allows both to shine.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of apart from the presentation which they have to do for the module which I'm doing right now, like I said, they have to make a board game. But actually, I could change the way the marks were. So what I did is I made the board game submission actually worth the same amount of marks as a thing which you have to do called a sketchbook, which I don't know if you had to do it in your for college in your classes. But for anybody who doesn't know what it is, essentially it's mainly used for artists, but it also is a great tool to sort of get people into the right workflow of industry, where you sort of take your process from start to finish, giving saying basically what you do, why you do it, and then backing up why you do that with evidence, and then showcasing feedback and iteration based on that feedback, and then it's sort of like a timeline from start to finish of that entire development. Yeah. And I've never applied for a job as an artist, but something which was told to me quite a bit from like artist friends that have got a job, as well as like other lecturers, is that it will be incredibly rare, unless you are insanely good, that you will get a job based off an ArtStation portfolio, which is essentially just a beauty render of one character and no explanation as to why you did it. Yeah. It's almost the same as like I don't know whether you would have come across this, but especially when I was in high school and college, like you see those artists with like massive black bags, like well, like a big like sort of like it's like they're carrying like a 50-inch laptop in the like around with them, and that's essentially like over the internet now. Obviously, you have to sort of hand them that whole like booklet of like this is the process from start to finish of how you do something, and that was something which when I was on the course that wasn't really instilled to us as to why you're sort of doing it, which is another thing which I want to do with students as well. Like I don't think I've ever seen any teacher do this, but like what the first lecture I did, the first slide was a reason as to why you should listen to me, like actually giving a reason as to why you should pay attention, not just like, I mean, they've got other reasons as well, such as like they paid money and they've probably gotten a train to get here, so they might as well listen, but sometimes that's not enough for people. So it's again like a bunch of reasons as to why they should listen to me, and like it's the same with the sketchbook as well. When I was on the course, it was just do the sketchbook, but there was never a reason as to why. And so another reason which I wanted to do that, in case people didn't really care about, because like we talked about, like there's people who just end up going to uni because that is what they're doing and not really a reason as to why. But if they're going to uni and they at least want to get good marks, then they would hopefully engage with the sketchbook more, because I think the board game and the sketchbook are worth like 35% percent each or something like that. And then there's like other elements everywhere else spread apart. But yeah, was that something which you had to do for your course, or you
Yeah,
got the funds
so
to do?
we are the course I was teaching was under the UAL I can't remember what but it's a UAL course, even though it's not at a UAL, because the UAL, yes, it's a university, but they also create courses, and they sell them to places like colleges. So I was teaching a level 3 in game design, but the way that the UAL course works is that you have the first year's had, I think it was, not about to remember now, but something like 6 to 8 units,
Mm-hmm.
and for each of the initial units that you're doing throughout your year, UAL kind of takes into consideration that you're learning this thing as you're doing it. So by the time you've completed it, your mark, the grade you're given is either pass, merit, or distinction. But that's not the grade that you're getting. That's the grade that you're working at. So
Mm-hmm.
then we kind of review with them. Yeah, this is what you've achieved. This is what you could have done to get better. Or if they're already achieving like a really high grade, here's how you can. Here's the things that meant that you got this grade, so you can keep getting this high grade. And here are things that you could do maybe to really dazzle people at the end. And so at the end of the course, they have what's known as their final major project, which I think university kind of does as standard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and with their final major project, they take everything that they've learned through all of the units, and um, they have to exactly what you've just said. They have to explain why they've chosen to do this project, um, how it's working with everything that they've learned, or how it ties in with um, like just having really solid reasons why we wanted to do it. And some of them were doing things like, um, I'm doing this because this is the thing that I enjoy the most. It fits my skill sets, but also fits my interest.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, giving all those reasons, and they go through a similar process where they do that. There's a little stage where they present for feedback. We give them feedback. They iterate slightly to improve, and then that's their final.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's and to be honest with you, I think that's a really good process because, like you say, that is what will happen. Um, it tends to happen through the process of whatever pipeline you're working in. As an artist, you will um explain, or you're given a brief. You'll take that away. You then do like some preliminary stuff to say, well, this is what I think from what you've showed me. That, there's a lot of this back and forth, isn't there? Where it's like, this is what you showed me. This is what I think you meant, because sometimes when we have a straight up discussion, it's not obvious what we were meaning when we said what we were saying. And then that's what that conversation helps solidify, or clear out any misunderstandings that were happening. Then we go into like doing the actual design of the thing based on that conversation. And then we come back and go, look, I made the shiny thing. And they go, ah, cool. That is kind of, yeah, that is more or less there, except X, Y, Z, and then the
Mm.
iteration. Yeah, as you know. So yeah, I think it's really, really important for students to understand that really, like, being able to do the thing is like, um, it's almost like being able to do the thing is the easiest part of it.
Yeah, especially for
Being
artists as
able,
well,
yeah,
because that's why that's one of the things which I said to them as well. Like, there are going to be people, said to my students, there's going to be people sat in this room right now which have never questioned as to why they are good at art. Like, because obviously some people like grow up drawing, they grow up like being on the more artistic side of things, and like you're going through like high school, probably even college as well, and then they get to uni, and then they've never thought as to why they do anything which they do. And
yeah,
when you get to game dev, where you misusing hours, like say you for 40, say you misuse a week's worth of hours, like 40 hours, that's like a lot of money for a game development company to waste. And you need to be able to get what's in your brain out and into other people's brains exactly as how you imagine it. That's one of the main things about communicating, and then be able to convince them and back up reasons as to why you do things. Um,
mm,
and that is completely alien to a lot of people. But I found more so just with artists, just because there is that like the sort of the early development of like artistic skills and that sort of thing. Um, yeah, I found
Yeah,
it.
I think the other thing
Yeah.
is people with artistic skill sets, or and I have a bit of a problem with like that kind of terminology anyway, because I do feel like programming in a game is just as creative as drawing for a game.
Yeah.
But um, if you're a visual creative, you tend to be a visual thinker,
Hmm.
and if you're a programmer, you tend to have more of a logic and like mathematical kind of mind. Um, Processes seem like make sense to you. Whereas when you're, yeah, a visual creative, you tend to be a lot more free flow. If you're a painter, for example, you don't mind if there's a bit of splatter and stuff, because that's part of the art of being an artist. And life never has like these clean, crisp lines anyway. There's always a bit of a blurry edge to it. So yeah, you have these completely different mindsets that in game development have to communicate.
Hmm.
They have to be able to explain the visual fuzzy thinking and the logic thinking, and that's where we have most of our battles.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like I've gone on about artists quite a bit, but that's as equally, if not more so, probably definitely more so, an important lesson for designers to learn. Because like I always say that the thing that is the hardest part about making the game design document is getting anybody to read it at any point. Like people just don't like to read. And the game design documents are important because obviously it's the easiest slash best way to be able to get your idea completely across to other people. But
Mm.
I was very guilty of this a couple of years ago. Whenever we would work in a team project, I was working on a team outside of uni. I would just huge like 5,000 word document, no images, no tables, and just like this a splur of ideas out onto the page, and I expect everyone to read it and completely understand what I was going on about. From what I learned
Yeah,
from final year in particular, where I took more of a sort of like a vision holder sort of angle, where I was like kind of like step back quite a bit from the project, just because there was not to go into detail, but there was loads of like tooling which needed to be done and loads of assets which needed to be made before I could get in and start making levels, for example. I spent a lot of time crafting game design documents. Everything related to the game art aspects of the game, like that related to design, that was completely visual, almost no words. And what I found is that programmers, or at least the three programmers I were working with, love tables. They love just having everything in just a spreadsheet or on a table in Google Docs or whatever, and just so they can see one thing and see the values, and then like that's all they need to be happy.
yeah,
And so yeah, like going back to the sketchbooks, like I feel like most unis probably and colleges as well have this like in some form where they have to they force you to sort of like break down what you've actually done. And I
mhm,
think that can like not only does it sprawl into like design documents or sketchbooks for artists to get into industry, but also just like sort of your communication workflow as a whole, which again I think is one of the most important things you need to know how to do as a game dev.
yeah, yeah. I think and um, with the course that I was teaching, even right up until like the final weeks of the final major project, there were a few students where I was having a chat with them and explaining what grade they were working at. Um, and they were like, "But my work is better than like his work." And I
Mm.
was like, okay, so you've fallen into like a really bad trap here, where you thought that you could just like make the game and that's going to be the thing. But his game might not visually be as good as yours, or thematically might not be as good as yours, but it's a 30-70 split. 30% is the production of the project and how well you did at that, and 70% is your talking around that, is your writing up about it and your reasoning and all of this other stuff. And I was like, he has loads of that. You have next to none of it.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh my God, so I've got like a week or whatever to, I'm like, yeah, get writing, basically.
Yeah. I used an example which was from my second year actually, which was from my second year on the course, which was a it was for a visual design module, where we had free reign to make whatever we wanted. And one of my artist friends, who is still incredible, but was even back then really, really good at character art, made this like super high poly beauty render of this like it was a World of Warcraft inspired, but a World of Warcraft with like a 4K remaster a character, which looked incredible and was like beautiful. And that got 94 out of 100, which is an incredible grade. I think an A is 70. And then what I did in my first years is I put that on the slide, and I put right next to that beauty shot was just a not the best 2D box art for a board game, which I wanted to make. Like I just made like a mock-up of what it would be. And that also got 94 out of 100 as well. Now, on the the surface level, there's clearly one which deserves way more marks than the other, but it was to illustrate to them how important the sketchbook is, because mine was so much better. It sort of like evened out. Yeah, so that's just another way to sort of illustrate how important it is, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, even when I started out doing 3D character art, I got pretty good pretty quickly at um, having a model that wasn't quite perfect, but having like the compositing and the lighting and the rendering and like the posing dynamic enough that like it made a good render. But in the back end of it, I was because I was being self-taught at this point in time, my process was trash.
Mm.
It was absolute trash. I and quite a lot of the time, because I had a personal confidence with creating art, like I'd always grown up drawing characters and I felt like I knew those shapes, even though really like drawing 3D shapes and making 3D shapes are very, very different. Um, and yeah, it just meant that like I had, if anyone had come to me and said, "Oh, that character's amazing," like, how did you get to that? All I could say was, "Oh, well, it was in here, and now it's there."
Yeah.
Like I had no preliminary sketches, I had no drawings of poses, I had no like design detailing of why I rigged it the way that I rigged it. Um, no explanation for the UV unwrapping, which at that point was total cheat sheet. Like, just I was trying to do the simplest way of getting away with it because my end goal was always just these gorgeous renders. But again, like you say, if I were to present that as part of a college course or a uni course, it wouldn't get highly graded. They'd be like,
Yeah.
that's beautiful, that's great, like great end result, but we have no idea where any of this came from. No one could work with you to do this. Like if someone had come to me and said, "Yeah, can you create this character?" and I just went, "There you go," they're gonna go, well, the first problem I probably would find is that they'd be like, "That's not what I wanted you to create,"
Yeah.
because there was no back and forth on, there's no sketches, no nothing. So yeah, like process is like you say is just so important for students to understand that there, yes, there's a goal, but and it's one of those cheesy things, but the journey is as important as the final destination.
Yeah, 100%. And like what we said there, where like you said that the grade for your work wouldn't be super high at uni, like that is and then you compared it to the industry, that is it. There's like the is a direct correlation between the marks which you get at uni. Well, it depends on obviously the course and how good it is, but it's
Yeah,
designed anyway to be catered towards like, okay, this is how it would be received if you had a job in industry as well. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, um, I was gonna mention one other thing, but I completely forgot what it was. But what I will say is, like, to sort of like conclude and sort of round it up, because we covered like a lot of stuff there.
Yeah,
I'd say that, yeah, there is basically game dev is, even if you think game dev is hard, it's harder than what you're thinking it is. And that if you wanted to get into it, then it's definitely something which you need to actually like want to do, because it's not
mm,
something like I don't want to badmouth any other degrees, but just like off the top of my head, like I don't know, like business studies, where like you could just like turn up, clock in, revise, and then do an exam at the end. Like you need to be able to have passion and actually want to be able to be a game developer to be able to get into it. And then also as well be prepared to take criticism, iterate on your work, be told that what you've been doing, let's say, for example, if you're an artist, what you've been doing for years might not be the right way to do it, or it might not like fit certain specifications. Because if you are passionate and you're talented, then the final bit is like being able to actually work in industry. And then that's when all the sort of I forgot what they're called, something skills, like the extra skill. Yeah, exactly. It's soft skills that you learn whilst at university. That those are that sort of the key things that you take away from university. I find. I mean, you learn stuff, but those are the I think the main things which will help you get a job. And I assume that if you're going for a degree in game dev, you want to get a job in game dev at some point. I'd imagine.
Yeah, when I was younger, it was they called because I'm 41, when they called it like being book smart and being street smart, and people used to like rave about how book smart was the thing that was going to get you like along in life, and then there were people who are like actually being street smart and not what you know but who you know is how you're going to get how you're going to do well. And realistically, you kind of need to be somewhere in the middle. You need to be smart enough to know what you're talking about. You need to be savvy enough that no one's going to pull the wool over your eyes, and you need to be able to do the thing that you say you're going to do. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's an all-round thing. You can't there can't be too much emphasis on any one thing. And if you the one of the things that you as an artist specifically you need to get really good at, and actually kind of anything in development really, but like being able to take criticism and and on the flip side of that, people need to get better at giving criticism and
Yeah.
feedback because some people just are not very good at it. But also there are things that you can do with that. Like you can before you ask for feedback, you can tell someone this is the kind of thing that I'm looking for, and that's how you get your feedback. It's a bit of an aside, but like all of these things are a part of game development. It's like you say, it's not just going to be if you can make a thing, if you can model stuff, then your career is going to be golden. There's so
Mm-hmm.
much more that needs to go into it. Um, and if you want to teach game development, then uh, just know that it's just as tough.
Yeah, pretty much.
um, I will say actually, this seems like a perfect place to talk about it. Obviously, Game Dev London has started doing Game Dev London EDU. We have our own education program. And part of the reason for that, A, is because of how hard it is to get into the industry, but also courses, especially if you're of a certain age, or if you're transitioning from one career to another, then financially it can be massively painful to try and do a course on something, get to the end of it, you've spent all this money, and you're like, actually, damn it, I don't think this is quite what I wanted to do. So yeah, Game Dev London is trying to create these education programs that are smaller in scope and they're cheaper in price, so that you can actually get a taste for, is that the thing that I want to do in game development? Is it that I want to be a character artist? Is it that I want to be um, a programmer? Like all of these things. Um, so nice little plug for us there.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's. I think you're right. Let's round this up here. Where
Yeah.
can people find you online? Find out more about you.
Ooh, okay. So my website is probably the best place to go. It's just niallcrabtree.com. I also have a YouTube channel. Just if you just search Niall Crabtree, it will come up there where I post. If you wanted to learn more about what it's like actually in industry, we're posting a lot of content on there, just like days in the life of working in industry, that sort of thing. I'm probably going to be doing a video specifically about teaching at some point as well. And then finally, just to be cheeky, plug one very specific thing. I'm currently working on a board game which is coming out in March of next year. If you go to Kickstarter and search the game Fatal Knockout, you will find that and you can subscribe to be notified when it goes live. So, yeah.
Nice, and I highly recommend people go and do that because I
Yes.
know that you're a great creator of games. And obviously, people can find me all over the internet. I'm on, sorry, I'm on all of the socials at Stuart De Ville. You can find me here at Game Dev London, or you can visit gamedev.london to find out not just about me, but about everything that Game Dev London does, from the podcast to our events, to our new education program, and everything in and beyond and between. And obviously, we would love it if you like, subscribe, and follow us on all of those lovely things. And we'll, until next time, see you next Monday. Goodbye.
See ya.